The Galactic Empire was ancient, vast, and arrogant in its certainty. For millennia, its banners had flown over conquered worlds, and its fleets had reduced countless civilizations to ash. They did not call their campaigns slaughter, they called them lessons. To them, war was not an art or a science, but a tool, a hammer raised high to crush resistance before it could become meaningful. Every shattered fleet and every silenced people was proof of their creed. The Empire knew war better than anyone in the galaxy. They repeated that phrase like scripture, like a shield against doubt. They believed it to their core. From the outer colonies to the shining core worlds, no one dared dispute their claim. Their archives were filled with victories, not stalemates. Every empire that rose against them was erased, every rebellion extinguished with overwhelming firepower. They fought not to test themselves, but to dominate. War, as they defined it, was the art of forcing submission. And because their fleets had always been unmatched, submission came quickly. Their enemies did not have the time to adapt, nor the courage to endure. The Empire cultivated this myth with care. Its commanders preached of perfect wars, campaigns completed before a single Imperial casualty was recorded. Its academies taught future strategists that speed and intimidation were more important than endurance. They did not train to bleed, they trained to crush. It was a system that had worked for centuries. A system that lulled them into arrogance so deep it seemed unshakable. Among the conquered were species once proud and dangerous, now broken into servitude. Fierce warriors reduced to serving as mercenaries, brilliant tacticians forced to teach in imperial academies, entire populations pacified by propaganda and brutality. They all spoke the same truth in hushed tones: resistance was futile. War, in the Empire's universe, was one-sided. It was never survival. It was never struggle. It was simply the powerful taking from the weak. And then, whispers began. At the edges of Imperial territory, scouts returned with rumors of a new species. A young civilization, scarcely past its first ventures into the stars. They called themselves humans. They had no sprawling empire, no legendary fleets, no ancient technologies. On paper, they were insignificant. Yet even the word carried unease. Reports described their rapid expansion, their strange mixture of cooperation and ferocity, their tendency to rebuild faster than logic suggested possible. More than one scout noted an unsettling trait: they did not appear intimidated. The Empire's high command dismissed these murmurs. They had heard it before. Every new species was said to be different until the fleets arrived and proved otherwise. Warriors, they scoffed. Until they learned the Empire's definition of war. Some admirals even welcomed the chance, claiming a fresh conquest would remind the galaxy of Imperial supremacy. They spoke as if it were a sport, as if the outcome was preordained. Not all agreed. Among the veterans of older campaigns, voices of caution rose. Alien generals who had fought under the Empire's banner tried to warn their masters. They spoke of something dangerous in humanity's eyes, of resilience that looked like madness. One commander, scarred from past battles, described them as a species that learned too quickly, that did not recognize defeat as final. His words were mocked, his rank quietly stripped, his warnings labeled superstition. No one wanted to hear that a primitive frontier species could pose a threat. In the council chambers of the Corps, the decision was made with arrogance carved into every word: humanity would be brought under the Imperial banner, swiftly and decisively. The fleets would depart, the colonies would fall, and Earth itself would kneel. They treated it like ritual, a formality that required no serious thought. For the Empire, this was not war, it was another lesson, another name to be added to their endless archive of conquests. They did not see the subtle difference that mattered. They had never fought a species that viewed war not as conquest, but as survival. They had never fought an enemy that would adapt rather than crumble. To the Empire, humanity was just another footnote waiting to be written. But to the veterans who had looked into human eyes, there was something else entirely: the promise of a war the Empire was not ready for. The invasion orders were sealed. Fleets were mobilized. Across the galaxy, the Empire prepared to deliver yet another demonstration of its supposed mastery. The propaganda machines declared victory before the first shot was fired, assuring all who listened that humanity would fall as countless others had fallen. And far away, on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable star, humanity heard the Empire's words, weighed them carefully, and prepared to answer in a way no one in the galaxy expected. The Empire believed it knew war. Soon, it would discover that it had never known it at all. The Empire's fleet entered the Sol system with the arrogance of gods descending upon mortals. Their ships filled the void, massive constructs of steel and firepower that had crushed hundreds of civilizations before. They announced their arrival not with diplomacy, but with demands. Broadcasts carried across Earth's satellites and colonies: surrender, pay tribute, bend the knee, and perhaps be spared annihilation. To them, it was the opening ritual of every conquest, spoken not as a request but as a sentence. Human leaders listened in silence. The Empire expected fear, pleading, or submission. Instead, the response was calm and measured, almost unsettling. The words carried no tremor, no stammering weakness, only quiet certainty. Humanity would not bow. There would be no tribute, no chains, no surrender. The Empire laughed. Their diplomats described humans as naive, confusing bravery for ignorance. Their admirals predicted the campaign would be completed within weeks. Children playing at soldiers, one commander sneered. They will learn what war means. It never occurred to them that their definition of war was not universal. The first engagement came quickly. A small human defense fleet intercepted the Imperial Armada near the edge of the system. Compared to the massive warships of the Empire, the human vessels looked fragile, underdeveloped, unworthy of mention. When battle was joined, the outcome was predictable. The Empire's guns tore through hulls, scattering debris across the void. Human ships broke apart, their engines burning out like dying stars. Within hours, the Empire declared victory, broadcasting images of wreckage to the galaxy as proof that humanity had already been humbled. But something in those images unsettled the few who studied closely. The human ships had not charged blindly. They had probed, maneuvered, tested defenses, and collected data even as they fell. Their defeat was not disorganized panic but calculated observation. What the Empire saw as weakness was, in truth, reconnaissance written in blood and steel. On Earth and in its scattered colonies the losses were grieved, but not as the Empire expected. Where other species had collapsed into despair, humanity responded with a colder resolve. Engineers worked day and night, replaying every second of battle footage, dissecting every failure, and recording every imperial weakness. Soldiers drilled harder, tacticians rewrote doctrines, scientists devised counters. What the Empire called a decisive victory was, for humanity, the beginning of study. Prisoners of war and informants carried troubling whispers back to imperial commanders. Humans did not despair. They did not resign themselves to defeat. They rebuilt, adapted, and returned stronger. A captured officer, questioned about his impressions of the species, answered in a single chilling sentence. They are not broken. They are taking notes. Still, the Empire refused to see danger. Their philosophy blinded them. To them, defeat meant submission, and since humanity had been defeated, submission was inevitable. They mistook silence for weakness, adaptation for desperation. They did not recognize what they were truly facing, a species that turned every loss into a lesson, every scar into strategy. Weeks passed, and new battles erupted across the edges of human space. Each time, the Empire crushed fleets with superior firepower. Each time, humanity seemed to collapse, until the pattern emerged. The next human engagement lasted longer than the last. Their formations shifted in ways that mirrored imperial tactics. Their weapons, once crude, grew sharper, modified with startling speed. Losses continued, but so did progress. What should have been a short, effortless campaign stretched into something unfamiliar, resistance that refused to die. The Empire's admirals grew irritated rather than alarmed. They spoke of extermination, of razing Earth entirely to erase the nuisance before it spread. But even as they planned annihilation, they could not shake the feeling that the war was not proceeding as expected. The enemy did not act like prey. They studied, they adapted, they endured. The galaxy began to take notice. Other species watched quietly, recognizing the signs that the Empire ignored. They saw that humanity was not broken by its defeats but sharpened by them. They saw that each skirmish was less a loss than a rehearsal. And still the Empire boasted. They declared the war already won, their victory inevitable, their dominance unchallenged. Yet behind the curtain of arrogance, something had shifted. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's perfect rhythm of conquest faltered. The enemy they dismissed as children was teaching them a lesson they had never learned before: what it meant to fight an adversary who refused to surrender. Humanity did not announce its intentions with speeches or proclamations. It prepared quietly, methodically, building the foundation for something the Empire had never faced. Every battle the Empire celebrated as victory was, for humanity, the drawing of a map, a blueprint that would one day be turned against them. The Empire believed it had already conquered Earth. In truth, it had only woken something that did not know how to kneel. The Empire pressed forward with growing frustration. By all measures, the campaign should have ended already. Their fleets were colossal, their weapons unmatched, their resources endless. Yet the war dragged on, not in weeks but in months, then longer. Humanity, the so-called primitives, refused to collapse. Every advance into human space was met not with surrender but with defiance. Villages evacuated before troops arrived, supply ships vanished without trace, patrols never returned. The Empire's progress was no longer smooth, it was slow, bloody, and costly. Humanity had begun to fight in ways the Empire had never experienced. Their forces struck not in conventional battles but in shadows. Small craft appeared from asteroid fields, tearing into fuel convoys before vanishing again. Communications were disrupted by signals no Imperial engineer could trace. Entire fleets found themselves isolated, starved of supplies, their strength drained without a single decisive engagement. To the Empire, this was dishonorable, chaotic, beneath the dignity of true war. To humanity, it was survival perfected into strategy. Captured data revealed a chilling truth. Human engineers dismantled wrecked Imperial ships within days, pulling secrets from them and replicating technologies with shocking speed. Weapons once foreign became familiar, defenses once unassailable found themselves bypassed. Within months, human vessels no longer looked so crude. They bore scars of adaptation, armored plating taken from Imperial blueprints, weapons altered for maximum disruption. Every encounter taught them something new, and every lesson was sharpened into a weapon for the next strike. The psychological tide began to turn. Imperial soldiers, once convinced of their invincibility, found themselves haunted by an enemy that seemed everywhere and nowhere. Convoys traveled in silence, aware that human ships could strike without warning. Outposts whispered of shadows moving in the dark, of raids where survivors heard human voices on open channels, not threatening but promising. "We are not done!" For a species the Empire dismissed as children, humanity wielded fear with precision. Commanders demanded escalation. Larger fleets were dispatched, bombardments grew heavier, and orders grew harsher. Planets suspected of sheltering resistance were burned from orbit, civilians slaughtered to force compliance. Yet the cruelty backfired. Instead of breaking human will, it hardened it. Each atrocity became fuel. Each fallen settlement carved determination deeper into the human spirit. Where the Empire saw deterrence, humanity saw reasons to fight harder. Other species, long crushed under Imperial rule, began to notice the cracks. They had once believed resistance impossible, but humanity's endurance whispered a dangerous idea: perhaps the Empire could be challenged. Quiet rebellions flickered in corners of the galaxy, sparked not by weapons but by hope. Even those who did not rise openly watched the humans closely, measuring their progress with awe and fear. The Empire, blind to its own unraveling, continued to insist victory was inevitable. But its commanders could not deny the unsettling reports: casualty lists rising, fleets stranded, logistics unraveling under constant disruption. They had expected another swift conquest. Instead, they faced an opponent that did not fight by their rules. Humanity had rewritten the very definition of conflict. And then came the first major shock. An Imperial fleet, sent to annihilate a small colony, never returned. Wreckage was found drifting across the void, ships torn apart in ambushes so precise they seemed impossible. The Empire tried to dismiss it as anomaly, sabotage, or bad luck. But whispers spread through the ranks. Humanity was not just surviving anymore. They were winning battles. What unsettled the Empire most was not the loss itself, but what it implied. Humanity had not started with superiority. They had earned it, piece by piece, loss by loss, victory by victory. They had taken the Empire's strength and made it their own, then turned it back with lethal creativity. From intercepted transmissions came a voice that chilled every commander who heard it. A human officer, calm and resolute, speaking across hacked channels. You thought you knew war. You have only known conquest. Now you will learn war from us. The Empire, for the first time in generations, began to feel fear. The Empire gathered its greatest fleet, determined to end the nuisance once and for all. Hundreds of capital ships, carriers, and escorts assembled, a force so immense that no opponent had ever survived its arrival. Admirals boasted that humanity would be erased in a single stroke. The galaxy was told to watch as the so-called resistance was crushed beneath overwhelming firepower. It was to be a spectacle, a final demonstration of Imperial supremacy. But humanity had been waiting. Every engagement, every skirmish, every defeat had been preparation for this moment. They had studied Imperial formations, dissected their communication patterns, learned the rhythm of their command structure. They knew where the Empire was strong, and more importantly, where it was vulnerable. When the Grand Fleet advanced, it did not march into battle, it marched into a trap. Entire systems had been transformed into weapons. Asteroid fields mined with explosives, stars seeded with destabilizing devices, decoy transmissions lured fleets into ambushes. What the Empire expected to be straightforward annihilation became a nightmare of confusion. Navigation systems failed without warning, supply lines collapsed, ships were cut off from reinforcements. In the void of space, where Imperial doctrine depended on overwhelming coordination, humanity turned chaos into an ally. The battles that followed shocked even neutral observers. Human fleets, smaller and seemingly weaker, struck with precision. They did not waste fire on displays of strength. Every shot was calculated, every maneuver designed to bleed the enemy dry. One by one, massive Imperial warships fell, torn apart not by sheer force but by strategy that turned their size into liability. Fear spread among the Imperial ranks. They had expected to terrify humanity into submission, but instead, it was their own soldiers who began to whisper in dread. They spoke of ambushes where entire task forces vanished, of ships that never responded to hails, of humans appearing from the dark only long enough to destroy before fading again. For the first time, the Empire's fleets began to hesitate. Desperation led the Empire to escalate further, ordering planetary bombardments to terrorize civilians into compliance. Yet even this cruelty failed. Rather than break, humanity's fury deepened. Survivors carried stories of devastation to other colonies, and with each atrocity, resistance hardened. What the Empire called punishment only fueled an unshakable unity. Humanity did not fracture under fire, they forged themselves into something unstoppable. Their counterstrikes grew bolder. Human fleets pierced into Imperial territory, bypassing outer defenses and striking at command hubs once thought untouchable. Shipyards burned, supply depots collapsed, and governors who had once mocked the war now pleaded for reinforcements. The Empire, long accustomed to dictating the pace of conflict, found itself reacting, scrambling, struggling to contain an enemy that refused to fight by their rules. Allies of the Empire began to reconsider their loyalties. Species long subjugated saw hope in humanity's defiance. Some quietly sabotaged Imperial efforts, others defected outright, their hatred of the Empire outweighing their fear. Rebellion spread like sparks in dry grass, each act of defiance a testament to the truth: the Empire was not invincible. And at the center of it all stood humanity, the catalyst of a storm that the Empire could no longer control. The propaganda machine faltered. Where once the Empire declared inevitable victory, silence grew. Images of burning warships could not be hidden, whispers of defeat could not be silenced. Soldiers who once believed themselves invincible now fought with doubt in their hearts. The enemy they had dismissed as primitive was dismantling their empire piece by piece. In interrogation chambers, Imperial officers attempted to break captured humans. Yet even in chains, their words were defiant. One prisoner, facing threats of execution, looked into the eyes of his tormentor and spoke with unnerving calm. "You cannot frighten us. You cannot break us. War is our element." His words spread through the ranks like poison, a reminder that humanity was not just resisting, they were teaching the Empire fear. The tide had turned. For the first time in living memory, the Empire was not advancing but retreating. Its greatest fleet lay scattered across ruined systems, its territories aflame with rebellion, its commanders stripped of certainty. The war that was supposed to be short and decisive had become a quagmire, and at its heart was a species that had refused to kneel. Humanity had proven not only that they could fight but that they could redefine the very meaning of war. And still, the humans pressed forward. They were no longer content with survival. They were shaping destiny, and the Empire could feel the noose tightening around its throat. The Empire had reached the edge of collapse. What began as a campaign of conquest had become a war of survival, and for the first time in centuries, it was not humanity fighting for its existence, it was the Empire itself. The vast fleets once thought untouchable lay in fragments scattered across dead systems. Supply lines were broken, colonies were in revolt, and whispers of defeat spread faster than any propaganda could suppress. The Emperor, who had once spoken of inevitable victory, now faced a reality he had never imagined. The enemy he mocked as primitive had pushed the Empire to its knees. Humanity pressed into the core systems with relentless precision. They did not waste strength on symbolic gestures or Pyrrhic victories. Every strike was targeted, deliberate, designed to cripple the foundations of imperial power. Command centers that had directed wars for centuries burned. Military academies were silenced, their proud traditions erased in hours. Shipyards that once supplied fleets across the galaxy fell silent, their skeletons left as monuments to imperial arrogance. The Empire tried one last gamble: negotiation. They offered terms, hoping to buy time, expecting humanity to settle for recognition, tribute, or symbolic victories. But humanity had no interest in partial measures. Their demands were clear and unyielding: release every enslaved world, dismantle every war fleet, and end the system of domination that had defined the Empire for generations. There would be no compromise, no half measures, no return to the old order. The Empire had not sought peace when it believed itself strong, and humanity would not grant mercy now that it was weak. The final battles broke what remained of imperial pride. Human fleets advanced into the throne system itself, breaching defenses that had stood for millennia. The capital, once the heart of conquest, became the stage for humiliation. Imperial soldiers who had once marched proudly through conquered streets now fought in panic, their discipline shattered. The Emperor watched his empire unravel, realizing too late that he had never understood the enemy he had provoked. His people had believed war was intimidation, a performance of dominance. Humanity had revealed the truth: war was endurance, intelligence, and was sharpened beyond reason. Across the galaxy, enslaved species cheered as chains were broken. The liberation was not abstract. Human fleets arrived and dismantled the symbols of imperial control, offering weapons, training, and solidarity. Where once there had been only submission, now there was defiance. Humanity had not only destroyed the Empire's military machine but also ignited a revolution of thought. The myth of invincibility was gone, and with it, the very foundation of imperial rule. For those who had doubted, the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had begun this war as a fledgling race with limited technology and no empire. They had endured defeats, studied every mistake, and transformed themselves into something the galaxy had never seen. They had done what no one thought possible: turned the greatest war machine in history into wreckage. The Emperor, in his final address before surrender, spoke not to his people but to the humans themselves. His voice, once thunderous with arrogance, trembled as he admitted the truth: the Empire had never known war. It had only known conquest. Humanity, he declared, had shown them what war truly was. His words, broadcast across the stars, became a confession carved into history. But humanity did not let the moment pass into symbolism. They dictated the peace with cold clarity. No world would remain in chains. No fleet would remain to threaten the galaxy. The memory of imperial arrogance would not fade, it would serve as a warning. The message was simple and brutal: this is what happens when you mistake conquest for war. In the years that followed, stories of humanity's campaign spread to every corner of known space. They were not tales of brute strength alone, but of resilience, strategy, and an unbreakable refusal to kneel. To some, humanity became saviors; to others, they were monsters who had rewritten the meaning of conflict. But in every telling, one truth remained: the galaxy would never again underestimate them. Where once the Empire had declared itself master of war, now it was humanity whose name was spoken with awe and fear. Not because they had sought dominance, but because they had proven something far greater. They had taught the galaxy that true war is not about power displayed but about the unyielding will to resist, adapt, and strike until the enemy can no longer stand. The Empire had believed it knew war. Then humanity arrived. And nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same.